The kitchen tiles were icy beneath my cheek, their chill sinking into my skin until I could no longer tell if I was trembling from cold or fear. Jagged shards of the shattered plate pressed into my palms, sharp reminders of what I had just done. My heart thundered inside my chest, so violently that I was certain he could hear it from across the room. I stayed perfectly still, my breath caught in my throat, the taste of iron and panic heavy on my tongue. I had just destroyed Gabriel's perfect salmon dinner, letting the porcelain explode against the floor in a display that looked accidental. My collapse had to look real. It had to convince him. I'd practiced this moment in my mind for days, but nothing could prepare me for the sickening quiet that followed. Every instinct screamed for me to get up, to shout at the man who had once been my home, to demand answers from the stranger he had become. But I couldn't move, not yet. If I slipped, if I said one wrong word or showed even a flicker of suspicion, everything I'd uncovered would unravel. The truth had teeth, and if I wasn't careful, it would devour me before I could expose him. The truth that my husband, my partner, was slowly killing me. Just months ago, I had believed I was the luckiest woman alive. I had finally been promoted to Senior Marketing Director at Horizon Marketing in downtown Chicago, a position I had chased for over a decade. For a girl who'd grown up in a rundown apartment in Cicero, sharing a single room with two sisters, that corner office overlooking Lake Michigan had felt like stepping into another world. I was the first in my family to finish college, the first to prove that ambition could be louder than circumstance. Every fluorescent light in that building reflected back the proof of everything I'd worked for. I remembered walking out of Mr. Coleman's office that afternoon, my eyes burning with tears of disbelief, the city lights glittering like confetti through the glass. I couldn't wait to tell Gabriel. I dialed his number the second the elevator doors closed. "We did it," I said, my voice unsteady with happiness. For a moment, I waited for him to shout with joy, to celebrate with me the way we used to when life was simple. But the pause stretched long, until his voice finally came, flat, hollow. "That's amazing, Savannah," he murmured, the words mechanical, detached, as though he were congratulating a stranger. I brushed it off, convincing myself he was only discouraged about his own stalled career. He'd been struggling since the agency he worked for folded, and I believed, naively, that my success could be our success. That night, he insisted on cooking dinner, saying he wanted to celebrate properly. He chose salmon, my favorite, seared to perfection with his signature herb sauce that once made me melt. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and lemon, warm and familiar, but beneath it lingered something faintly metallic, something my instincts whispered wasn't right. He smiled as he poured the wine, his eyes dark pools I couldn't read anymore. I lifted the glass, hesitated, and in that tiny pause, I felt the edges of my life begin to crack. We sat wedged together at our small dining table in the Lincoln Park apartment, the hum of the city pulsing faintly through the windows. Outside, the skyline shimmered, neon reflections stretching across the glass like restless ghosts. The clatter of dishes mixed with the low hum of traffic and the soft rustle of wind pressing against the curtains. For a fleeting moment, I felt invincible, like everything I'd ever fought for was finally within reach. Gabriel smiled across the table, his face glowing in the amber light of the pendant lamp, and I told myself that this was happiness. That the man before me was still the same one who used to surprise me with coffee at dawn and dance with me barefoot in the kitchen when rent was overdue. But not long after, the world around me began to tilt. My stomach lurched as the room twisted, the walls pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. A dizzying wave washed over me, dragging me under. My vision fractured, splitting into shards of color and light. The edges of Gabriel's face blurred, his voice echoing as though underwater. "You okay?" he asked, reaching for me. His touch steadied my shoulders, but the warmth of his palms burned like a warning. I forced a smile, muttering something about exhaustion, blaming it on sleepless nights and caffeine. He tilted his head, studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You're pushing too hard, Savannah," he said softly. "Let me take care of you." I'd once believed that was love, his concern, his insistence that I rest, his endless offers to cook, to handle things so I could focus. I didn't see the control hiding beneath the kindness. I didn't question why he hovered so close as I ate, or why he always refilled my glass before I even noticed it was empty. Back then, His smile seemed gentle. Now, lying on the cold kitchen floor with ceramic shards biting into my skin, I saw everything through a different lens. It was all there, the pattern I'd ignored. The subtle glint in his eyes as he watched each forkful pass my lips. The way he'd tilt his head when I told him about work, asking questions that sliced too deep, probing for weaknesses I hadn't realized I'd revealed. His curiosity had stopped sounding like support and started feeling like surveillance. How had I missed it? This was the man who'd held me through sleepless nights during college panic attacks, who'd sworn on trembling hands that we were unbreakable. I'd memorized his heartbeat, trusted his silences, built my life around the idea of us. But the truth had been festering behind those familiar eyes all along. The dizziness became my constant companion, creeping in like a fog that refused to lift. Every evening after one of his carefully prepared meals, it returned, slow, suffocating, and cruel. At first, I blamed the grind. The Carver Enterprises campaign had consumed every waking hour of my life, the biggest contract Horizon Marketing had ever pursued. $15 million. A deal that could cement my name in the company's history or destroy it. I poured myself into it, combing through analytics, dissecting every angle of Carver's brand presence, creating pitches that lived and died by a single phrase. I told myself the headaches were from blue light, that the fatigue came from ambition, that success always had a price. I lived on coffee, adrenaline, and the belief that my body could take it. I was wrong. The nights bled into mornings. My notebooks filled with sketches of campaign concepts and margins of half-legible notes written through tremors I didn't understand. My reflection in the bathroom mirror grew paler each week, my once steady hands shaking as I buttoned my blouse. Still, I convinced myself it was stress until I began noticing how my nausea always followed dinner. Always after Gabriel cooked. Always after that same soft smile, that same tender concern that now felt like a performance. It wasn't love that filled his voice when he told me to rest. It was triumph. Quiet, patient triumph. Gabriel had always felt like my anchor in a world that spun too fast. He listened with patient eyes while I talked endlessly about campaign strategies, quarterly targets, and brand metrics no one else cared to hear. He'd nod thoughtfully, standing at the stove, steam curling around his face as something aromatic simmered behind him. His questions came gently, like he was genuinely curious. What's your hook for the presentation? Or how are you planning to frame the pitch this time? And every time, I mistook it for pride, for interest, for love. I believed he was invested in me, in us. I was wrong. The symptoms started quietly, small moments that were easy to dismiss. A flicker of disorientation when I stood up too fast. A headache that pulsed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. But within weeks, the dizziness deepened, clawing at my balance, twisting my perception until even the office walls seemed to ripple. By the second month, I could no longer pretend it was harmless. It wasn't fatigue, it was sabotage wrapped in domestic warmth. My once flawless focus fractured. I'd sit in meetings, grasping for names I'd repeated hundreds of times, watching colleagues' faces blur together in an unfamiliar haze. During a major pitch rehearsal, my mind blanked completely. The slides on the screen looked like a foreign language, every carefully rehearsed line evaporating before it reached my lips. My co-workers glanced at one another in quiet concern. I could feel their doubt sink into the air around me, thick and suffocating. Nova, my assistant, barely 23, bright-eyed and relentless, started hovering near my desk. She was sweet, eager, always ready to help, and she noticed the cracks I was trying to conceal. "You're overworking yourself, Savannah," she said one afternoon after I'd stumbled through a client call I'd personally scheduled. Her tone was gentle, but there was worry beneath it. She tried to hand me a bottle of water, her fingers trembling slightly. I thanked her with a weak smile, brushing it off with the same excuses I'd rehearsed: long hours, too much caffeine, deadlines closing in. But her eyes told me she didn't believe it. When I got home that night, Gabriel's voice greeted me from the kitchen, warm and soothing like the first note of a familiar song. He set a plate of salmon in front of me, the scent of lemon and dill drifting upward like comfort itself. "You've got to slow down," he murmured, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "You can't keep burning yourself out like this. Your health comes first. His words were a caress, soft and concerned, and for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But something inside me had begun to stir, a quiet unease that refused to die. His compassion felt rehearsed, too perfectly timed, like a scene from a play I didn't realize I was in. I couldn't name it yet, but there was an edge to his kindness, something cold flickering beneath the surface of his gaze. Still, I pushed forward. Mr. Coleman had placed his faith in me, giving me a chance no one else would have dared. The Carver Enterprises account was more than a project, it was my proving ground. Success meant legitimacy, security, the validation I'd chased since childhood. Failure wasn't an option, no matter how many times the room spun or my body screamed for rest. Eventually, I caved and made an appointment with Dr. Patel, the same physician who'd seen me through scraped knees and nervous teenage rashes. His office smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint, the same comforting mix that had eased me since I was 12. As I sat on the exam table, legs swinging like a child's, he scanned my chart with a frown. "You've lost weight," he said quietly. "Are you sleeping at all?" I laughed it off, telling him about the new position, the long nights, the endless pressure. He listened, nodding, then ran the usual tests. I told him about the nausea, the dizziness, the metallic taste that sometimes coated my tongue after dinner. He asked what I'd been eating, whether anything had changed. I hesitated for the briefest second before mentioning Gabriel's cooking, his new obsession with helping me relax by preparing every meal. Dr. Patel didn't say much then. Just a soft hum and a reminder to drink more water, to rest when I could. But I caught something in his expression, an unease he tried to hide behind clinical calm. As I left his office, the autumn wind cut across my face, and a thought I couldn't shake whispered through me. What if the problem wasn't me at all? Dr. Patel's office was a pocket of calm tucked away in the chaos of the city, small but comforting in its familiarity. The walls were covered in fading motivational posters about wellness and perseverance, their corners curling slightly with age. The scent of antiseptic lingered beneath a faint trace of lavender from an old diffuser perched on a shelf. I sat on the crinkling paper sheet of the exam table, twisting my fingers together until my knuckles ached. My throat felt tight, the words clawing to escape. "It's always after dinner," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. About half an hour later, everything tilts. My head spins, my thoughts blur, and it feels like I'm watching myself from far away. The confession tumbled out, heavy and brittle. Dr. Patel's pen moved steadily across her notepad, the soft scratch of ink the only sound filling the space. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, her eyes had narrowed slightly in quiet concern. "Any new foods? Supplements? Changes in medication?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, nothing new. Gabriel's been doing the cooking lately. He says he wants me to eat cleaner. Mostly fish, grilled vegetables, smoothies. He's trying to take care of me." I tried to make it sound light, but something in her gaze sharpened, as if she'd heard the tremor beneath my words. She set her pen down and folded her hands. "How long has he been between jobs?" The question struck like a cold needle. I blinked, caught off guard. "A few months," I murmured. "Why?" Dr. Patel didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, her expression thoughtful but guarded, and handed me a small notebook. "Start writing things down. Everything you eat, every symptom, every hour of the day. Don't skip a detail," she said quietly. "Sometimes patterns tell stories we can't see." I took her advice to heart. For the next 2 weeks, that diary became my lifeline. Each page filled with shaky handwriting, timestamps, meals, and sensations I could no longer ignore. Morning, coffee and toast. Fine. Afternoon, salad from the cafe. Alert. Evening, salmon with herbs, dizzy 30 minutes later. Every entry told the same haunting truth, repeating itself like a grim refrain I could no longer deny. By the end of the first week, the evidence had begun to form a pattern too precise to dismiss. The fog, the nausea, the trembling hands all followed one consistent trigger: Gabriel's food. On nights I claimed I had no appetite, pretending my stomach hurt, I felt my old self resurface. My mind cleared, my energy returned, and the weight pressing on my chest lifted. The difference was terrifying in its clarity. I started experimenting, testing the edges of my fear like a scientist desperate for proof. While Gabriel hummed at the stove, I'd pretend to take bites, letting the food linger at the edge of my plate. When his back was turned, I wrapped mouthfuls in napkins, tucking them into my sleeve or dropping them into the trash beneath a pile of paper towels. Sometimes I'd flush the remains down the toilet, watching the evidence swirl away, my pulse pounding in my ears. Those nights, something inside me shifted. I'd sit at my desk long after midnight, papers spread in careful chaos, the city lights spilling through the blinds. My mind felt sharp again, lucid, unstoppable. The Carver pitch flowed out of me with renewed force, every word landing exactly where it needed to. The fog that had dulled my thoughts evaporated, leaving behind a clarity that terrified me as much as it thrilled me. And that was when the truth began to harden into something undeniable. This wasn't stress, or exhaustion, or overwork. It was deliberate. A pattern carved into my life by someone who knew me too well. Someone who had learned exactly how to make me doubt myself, to make me weak. The realization crept in slowly, like poison spreading through a vein. The man who used to trace constellations across my shoulders, who whispered promises into my hair, who once swore he'd never let anything hurt me, he was the one holding the spoon. Gabriel began to notice the changes before I was ready to face them myself. His comments started as casual observations, the kind that seemed harmless at first glance. "You didn't eat much tonight," he'd say, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Then, little by little, his tone hardened, polished concern turning into something colder, more exacting. "You're wasting away, Savannah." The words struck with quiet accusation, as though I'd disappointed him, as if my shrinking appetite were a personal affront. His gaze lingered too long, dissecting me piece by piece across the dinner table. What once passed as affection began to feel like surveillance. His attention wasn't tender, it was calculated, precise, like a scientist studying a test subject for results. Each meal became a performance, a game of pretense where my safety depended on the tilt of my fork and the timing of my smiles. I learned to chew slowly, to pretend satisfaction, to leave just enough on my plate to seem full but not suspicious. My pulse raced every evening, the clink of cutlery against porcelain echoing like a clock counting down. One night, as the glow of the kitchen light turned the air honeygold, I caught him watching me in that way again, too still, too focused. I moved a piece of chicken across my plate, letting the silence stretch. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching just beneath his cheekbone. "Something wrong with the food?" The words were swift, clipped, slicing through the air before I could even answer. His tone carried no warmth, only the faintest edge of warning. My skin tingled with unease. I forced a shaky laugh, pretending indifference. "No, just not that hungry," I murmured, my voice barely steady. He leaned back slowly, his eyes scanning me like a lie detector. The space between us shrank, thick with tension. I could feel him searching for something, some sign of defiance, some flicker of truth I'd accidentally let slip. I smiled through the terror, praying my expression held. By then, I no longer needed confirmation. The diary had already revealed everything. Each page screamed the same silent verdict: his food was the trigger. His dinners were the poison. Whether it was chemicals or something subtler, I didn't know, but I knew he was the source. The thought alone made my stomach twist. Fear became a living thing inside me, coiled tight beneath my ribs, thrumming like a second heartbeat. Every moment near him felt staged, every word I spoke carefully edited. I rehearsed my lies the way I used to practice presentations: steady voice, steady breathing, eyes never wavering. The smallest slip could mean discovery, and discovery felt like death. I kept remembering the man I thought I knew, the one who had once stood beside me under the glittering Chicago snow, both of us breathless and laughing as we chased flakes down empty streets. The man who'd carried pizza boxes up 4 flights of stairs after midnight, joking about being broke but happy. The one who promised, with absolute conviction, that we'd face everything together. That man had vanished, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. The more certain I became of his deception, the more dangerous his presence felt. His questions about my work took on a new intensity. "Where's the final budget file?" he asked one evening, his tone too casual to be real. You still keeping copies offline? The inquiry slithered beneath the surface of conversation, its meaning sharp enough to draw blood. I tried to laugh it off, saying something about company policy, but his eyes never left mine. There was hunger in his curiosity, a hunger that had nothing to do with money or ambition, it was about control. At dinner, his movements became predatory, deliberate. He hovered near me, too close, his chair scraping softly against the floor as he leaned in to pour my wine or adjust my napkin. The air around him felt heavy, like a trap waiting to spring. I could sense his attention circling me the way a wolf watches a wounded deer, patient and certain of its victory. Each night ended the same way, me locked in the bathroom under the guise of a shower, shaking silently as I stared into the mirror, whispering reassurances to my reflection that I wasn't crazy. But deep down, I knew, the poison wasn't just in the food anymore. It was in the air, the walls, the memories. It was in him. I needed proof, something concrete, undeniable, something that couldn't be twisted into paranoia or dismissed as stress. The diary wasn't enough. I needed something I could hold up to the light and say, here. This is what he's done. Something that would make the police listen, make Horizon believe I wasn't losing my mind. Without evidence, it would just be my word against his, and Gabriel had always been the charming one, the man who could make lies sound like lullabies. The Carver presentation loomed only 3 days away, and the deadline burned in my mind like a countdown to destruction. I knew he would act soon, his timing was always meticulous. My intuition screamed that his patience was running out. His unemployment had stripped him raw, leaving behind resentment that glimmered just beneath the surface. I saw it in the tightness of his jaw whenever I spoke about work, in the way his knuckles whitened around his coffee mug when I mentioned another client win. Success had become an invisible crime in our home, and every word I spoke about my career seemed to cut him deeper. I had to move carefully. One misstep, one hint that I knew, and he'd become unpredictable. He was still my husband, still the man who could make his voice drip with tenderness when he wanted to. But now I understood that the same hands that once brushed tears from my cheeks could just as easily be the ones that ended me. That weekend, I decided to run my final test, the moment that would confirm everything. Gabriel insisted on cooking, announcing that he wanted to make my favorite meal, seafood pasta with white wine and lemon butter. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and nostalgic, pulling at memories of better years. I forced myself to smile, my stomach churning as I took my seat. He set the bowl before me, the sauce glistening, steam curling in delicate tendrils toward the ceiling. You've been working too hard again, he said with that familiar softness, though his eyes never quite matched the tone. You deserve something good. I lifted my fork with trembling hands, praying he couldn't see them shake. I swallowed each bite, tasting more than food, tasting the slow, deliberate destruction he'd been feeding me for months. I complimented the flavor, praised the texture, let laughter slip through my lips like everything was fine. I had to keep him calm, keep him confident. Exactly 37 minutes later, the world began to spin. The dizziness hit like a wave crashing against rock, fierce and disorienting. My pulse thundered in my ears, and my limbs turned to stone. The edges of my vision blurred, colors bleeding into one another as if the air itself had thickened. I'd prepared for it this time. Hidden in the pocket of my cardigan, a small voice recorder hummed quietly, capturing every slurred syllable, every uneven breath. I think. I need to lie down, I mumbled, the words barely coherent. My tongue felt heavy, my thoughts scattered like glass shards across the floor. Gabriel's expression shifted instantly, concerned, tender, perfectly rehearsed. He placed a hand on my back, guiding me gently toward the couch. You're okay, sweetheart, he whispered. His touch was careful, precise, almost reverent. As the room tilted and darkened, I heard it, the soft creak of my office door opening. My stomach dropped. The faint hum of my laptop followed, its familiar startup chime slicing through the silence like a blade. My heart hammered beneath the haze. He thought I was unconscious, just like every other night, defenseless and unaware while he sifted through my files. Through the fog, I registered the rustle of papers, the quiet tapping of keys. He was in my system, digging, copying, perhaps searching for something to use against me. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence, the precision in his movements. I stayed perfectly still, forcing my breathing to remain slow and shallow. My body betrayed me, heavy and sluggish, but my mind clung to one thought: this is it. Every second that passed tightened around me like a noose, but I didn't move. I let the recorder run, capturing the sounds, the click of my mouse, the scrape of a chair, the faint murmur of his voice as he muttered under his breath. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I'd never know. When he finally returned, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead, I felt bile rise in my throat. "You should sleep here tonight," he whispered, kissing the top of my head. "I'll clean up." His words sounded like care, but all I heard was calculation. Behind my closed eyes, the truth pulsed, undeniable and alive. The man I loved was my poisoner, and now, I finally had the beginning of proof. Monday felt like a countdown ticking in my veins. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with dread, each second dragging me closer to the confrontation I could no longer postpone. The presentation was in 2 days, and if Gabriel had been drugging me to sabotage my work, tonight would be his last chance. I kept telling myself to breathe, to focus, but even my reflection in the office mirror looked foreign, pale, hollow-eyed, determined. I spent most of the day in the restroom, whispering my plan to my reflection until my nerves steadied. My phone buzzed with reminders, messages from Nova asking if I was okay, but I couldn't risk explaining. Every piece had to fall perfectly into place. If I slipped, even once, Gabriel would sense it. He had an uncanny ability to read me, to predict my reactions before I had them. By the time I drove home, the sky was a bruised grey, clouds pressing low against the city skyline. The house looked peaceful from the outside, warm light spilling through the windows, a scene of domestic calm, but I knew better. Inside that kitchen was the man who smiled as he poisoned me. I parked down the street for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, forcing my heartbeat to slow. Then I stepped out, smoothing my hair, practicing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The door creaked open to the sound of a knife rhythmically hitting the cutting board. The scent of rosemary and lemon filled the air. Gabriel stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, movements controlled and elegant, like a chef preparing a feast for someone he loved. "You're home early," he said, glancing up with a grin that never reached his eyes. "Rough day." "Just exhausted," I murmured, clutching my stomach as if queasy. My voice felt far away, rehearsed, like an actress reciting lines in a play that could end in tragedy. He tilted his head, concern etched perfectly into his expression. "You've been overdoing it again. Sit down. I'll finish up." The chopping resumed, steady as a metronome, while I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the crinkle of the small plastic bag I'd hidden earlier. My phone was already pressed against my chest beneath my blouse, its recorder quietly documenting every sound. The table was set beautifully, candles lit, wine poured, napkins folded into perfect triangles. The meticulousness of it all made my stomach twist. When Gabriel carried the plate over, I caught a faint tremor in my hands. He noticed. "You sure you're all right?" he asked softly, but his tone carried an edge, something predatory beneath the surface. "Just tired," I said, forcing a weak laugh. The salmon glistened beneath the herbs, the aroma warm and familiar. It should have been comforting, but it made my pulse hammer. I cut a piece, lifted it to my mouth, and pretended to chew while slipping a morsel into the bag under the table. My throat felt tight, my heart racing with every movement. He watched me closely. "You're barely eating," he said after a pause, voice tightening. "You need strength for that big presentation." His words were honeyed, but I heard the steel beneath them. I nodded, pretending to swallow. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I forced myself to act slower, to seem groggy. My eyelids fluttered, my breathing slowed. "I think I need to lie down," I murmured, rising unsteadily. His hand was there instantly, guiding me toward the couch. "Of course," he said gently, brushing hair from my face. His touch sent a shiver down my spine. "You just rest. I'll clean up." As soon as my head hit the pillow, I let my body go limp. I listened. Footsteps. The faint hum of my laptop. A drawer opening, the sound of papers shifting. My phone captured it all, the proof I'd been desperate for. I stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing shallow, as his voice drifted from the other room. "She's almost done," he whispered. "The files will be ready soon." There was a pause. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing." My blood turned to ice. I clutched the edge of the couch, my pulse thundering in my ears. For months, I had doubted my instincts, blamed stress, exhaustion, bad luck. But this was confirmation. The man I loved had been dismantling my life piece by piece, smiling through every lie. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was spinning with adrenaline. I wasn't broken anymore, I was ready. And Gabriel had no idea the trap had already closed around him. When Gabriel reached for his wineglass, swirling it lazily before taking a sip, my pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every sound in the room, the scrape of silverware, the faint hiss of the candles, the ticking clock above the mantel, seemed amplified, like the house itself was holding its breath. He turned to grab a napkin, and for a fleeting second, I studied him under the golden kitchen light. He looked calm, almost serene, humming softly as if we were any ordinary couple sharing a peaceful evening. But I knew better. Beneath that easy smile was a monster wearing the skin of the man I loved. He glanced back at me, his eyes flicking over my half-empty plate. "You're not eating much," he said lightly, but I heard the tension coiled beneath his words. I forced myself to smile, my lips dry. "Just savoring it," I managed, forcing air through my lungs. "It's perfect, as always." The compliment hung between us, thin and fragile as glass. His grin stretched wider, too polished, too precise. "Glad to hear it," he murmured, setting down his fork with deliberate grace. For a moment, I thought he could hear my thoughts, that somehow he knew I was acting. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body stayed still, trapped in this deadly charade. He kept watching me, his gaze heavy, like he was waiting for me to falter. I focused on keeping my hands steady, cutting the salmon into neat pieces, pretending to chew, slipping morsels into the small plastic bag hidden in my sleeve when his attention shifted. My palms were slick with sweat. One mistake and it would all come crashing down. After what felt like an eternity, the meal ended. I'd managed to conceal most of the food without him noticing. I pushed my plate away and stood, pretending to stretch. "I'll clean up," I offered, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. Gabriel's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but he nodded, watching as I carried the dishes to the sink. My hands trembled as I dumped the tainted food into the garbage disposal, the grinding roar masking the sound of my quick, uneven breaths. "I should probably get back to work on the presentation," I said over my shoulder, drying my hands on a towel. My voice sounded normal, thank God. "I want everything perfect for Wednesday." He leaned against the counter, swirling what was left of his wine. "Don't push too hard," he said, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "You've been looking pale lately." I nodded, pretending gratitude. "You're right. Just a few tweaks and I'll call it a night." But inside, the plan was ticking down like a bomb. By 8:30, I had to move. The air in the house grew heavier as the minutes crawled by. I heard the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the rush of water in the sink. Gabriel was humming again an old tune from our college days, and the sound made my stomach twist. It used to comfort me, now it chilled my blood. At 8:25, my hands were slick, my heart hammering. I reached into my pocket, checking that the recorder was still running. It was. My evidence, my lifeline. I took one steadying breath, then another. I needed to sell the illusion. Pushing away from my desk, I staggered toward the kitchen, letting my shoulders droop. The world tilted as I leaned against the doorframe, gripping it as though my legs could barely hold me. "Gabriel," I slurred, forcing my words to drag like I was losing consciousness. "I don't feel so good." He turned instantly, his face shifting from surprise to concern in a heartbeat. "Savannah." He dropped the dishcloth and stepped closer, eyes scanning my face. "What's wrong?" I let my knees buckle slightly, catching the counter for support. "So dizzy," I whispered, my head lolling to one side. The room seemed to spin, not from poison this time, but from the effort of pretending. He crossed the space in 3 strides, his hands gripping my arms with a little too much force. "Sit down," he said, voice firm but soft. I let him guide me toward the couch, every movement rehearsed, every breath controlled. My pulse thundered, but I forced my eyelids to flutter closed. "I'll get you some water," he murmured, moving away. I heard the sound of a glass being filled, then the faint creak of the floorboards as he turned toward my office, the same path he'd taken before when he thought I was unconscious. I stayed perfectly still, breathing slow, the phone in my blouse capturing every sound. My heart was no longer just racing, it was a drumbeat of survival. Tonight, he would reveal everything, and I would finally have the proof I needed to end this nightmare. I let my knees collapse beneath me, my hand brushing against the edge of the counter as a ceramic plate toppled to the ground. The impact shattered it into a dozen sharp fragments that scattered across the kitchen tiles, ringing out like an alarm. The crash reverberated through the room, through my skull, through my chest. I hit the floor hard, cheek pressed to the icy tile, the air rushing from my lungs. I forced my body to go still, every muscle screaming to react, to run, to scream. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, yet I made it shallow, faint, the rhythm of someone fading. Gabriel's footsteps came fast, heavy, the kind of pace reserved for panic or performance. "Savannah. Oh my God, Savannah." His voice cracked at all the right places, frantic and trembling, but I heard the precision beneath it. The emotion was rehearsed, practiced. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands gripping my shoulders, shaking gently as though trying to rouse me from a faint. His palm brushed my hair back, fingers trembling, but not with fear. With calculation. "Savannah, please," he gasped, pressing 2 fingers against my wrist. His touch was steady, testing for signs of life, and I gave him just enough a faint flutter beneath his fingertips to keep him from suspecting. I let my breath slow to a ghost of air. My body was numb, but inside, I was fire burning with dread and fury. He lingered over me for a heartbeat longer, then exhaled, the sound low and sharp. I heard the faint rustle of fabric as he straightened, the weight of his footsteps shifting away. Then came the sound I had prayed not to hear, the click of his phone unlocking, followed by a brief silence and the soft buzz of a call connecting. "It's me," he said finally, and his voice transformed, smooth, cold, devoid of the affection I'd once clung to. Gone was the loving husband who made me tea when I couldn't sleep, who tucked notes into my purse on stressful days. This voice belonged to someone else entirely, calculated, detached, dangerous. "She's out," he continued, and my pulse nearly gave me away. Took a bit, but the dose worked. The dose. The words slithered through me like venom. "I'm grabbing the files now," he added, tone clipped, efficient. I could hear him pacing, the familiar rhythm of his boots against the hardwood. My blood ran cold, every nerve ending screaming, but I stayed still. Not a breath too deep. Not a twitch. There was a pause, followed by a muffled voice on the other end, a man, low and confident, speaking too quietly for me to make out the words. Then Gabriel's tone hardened further. "Yeah. Everything's here. Her laptop's got all of it, the Carver proposal, budget projections, client data. She's so damn paranoid she keeps it offline." He chuckled under his breath, a dry, humorless sound. "Makes my job easier. No passwords to hack. No trails." My stomach lurched. Carver. Horizon. My entire career, everything I'd built from the ground up, was being handed to my company's fiercest competitor. Apex Strategies. The name echoed in my mind like a gunshot. Gabriel's shoes scraped against the tile as he walked toward my office. I could picture it, his fingers sliding across my desk, flipping through the folders I'd carefully labeled, opening my laptop, the screen lighting up his face. "Easy pickings," he muttered. Then, with a quiet laugh that didn't sound human, he said, 3 months of this, and she's still clueless. Thinks she's sick." My jaw clenched. The casual cruelty in his voice sliced through me. The man who used to whisper "I love you" against my neck now mocked my pain like it was an inside joke. He moved further into the office, drawers opening, paper rustling. I could hear the zipper of his messenger bag, the click of my external drive being unplugged. "Got it all," he said into the phone. "Transfers happening tonight. Apex will have everything before morning." My heart hammered so loud I was sure he'd hear it. But he didn't. He was too wrapped up in his betrayal, in the thrill of his deceit. The floor creaked again as he circled back toward the kitchen. I let my eyelids stay heavy, willing my body to remain lifeless. His breath grew closer, then stopped just above me. For a long, unbearable second, I thought he'd realized that he could see through my act. Then he exhaled, muttering to himself, "You never knew when to quit, Savannah." His footsteps retreated, and a door creaked open, the sound of him slipping into the hallway, maybe heading toward the garage. The recorder in my blouse was still running, capturing every damning word, every cruel inflection. I waited until the front door shut, until silence wrapped around the apartment like a shroud. Only then did I open my eyes. The tiles were cold, and my limbs ached, but I didn't care. Because now, finally, I had proof not just of betrayal, but of something darker. Something that went beyond jealousy or resentment. My husband wasn't just sabotaging me. He was selling my life's work, piece by piece, to the highest bidder. And when he came back tonight, thinking I was still his fool, I'd be ready. I forced my eyes open, the room spinning in fractured shapes of shadow and light. The kitchen smelled of burnt herbs and cold metal, the air thick with tension and the faint sting of bleach. Shards of the shattered plate glittered across the tiles like tiny razors catching the dim glow from the hallway. My cheek throbbed from where it had hit the floor, and every muscle in my body screamed from the effort of remaining still for so long. But the pain didn't matter. The fear didn't matter. What mattered was survival and evidence. Adrenaline surged through me like wildfire, burning away the haze. I pressed my palm to the cold tile and pushed myself up, inch by inch, keeping my movements deliberate, silent. The world tilted slightly as I crawled toward my purse, each breath shallow and controlled. My fingers found the strap, dragging it toward me until I could reach inside. My heart hammered as I pulled out a small black USB drive, the one I used for my personal backups, a habit from years of being overly cautious. Tonight, that habit might save my life. Against my chest, my phone vibrated softly, still recording, still documenting every vile word Gabriel had said. His confession, his voice, his betrayal all captured. I fumbled for it, hands shaking, the screen lighting my face for a split second before I dimmed it again. My thumbs moved fast, driven by instinct more than clarity. First, I texted Dr. Patel. Emergency. Gabriel's drugging me. Send police to my address. The words blurred as I typed, but I double-checked, forcing my fingers to stay steady. Then another message, this one to Detective Harris, the investigator a friend from Horizon had once mentioned after an embezzlement scare. Corporate espionage. Audio proof. Please help. A soft ping confirmed the messages sent. Somewhere in the distance, faint but growing closer, I caught the wail of sirens slicing through the Chicago night. For the first time in months, hope ignited inside me. Gabriel's voice drifted from the office, a low, irritated muttering, laced with impatience. Come on, he hissed, and I could picture him hunched over my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The faint blue glow of the screen spilled through the crack beneath the office door, painting the hallway in eerie light. Staying low, I crept closer, the cool hardwood pressing against my palms. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I steadied it, reminding myself that every second counted. When I reached the doorway, I leaned just enough to see inside. My breath caught. On my desk sat a small glass vial half full of a clear, viscous liquid, no label, no markings. It caught the glow from the laptop screen, shimmering like liquid crystal. Beside it, his phone buzzed with notifications, one of which flashed across the display before fading. Payment confirmed, $50,000. He was pacing now, muttering under his breath. Grabbed the client list. Transferring now, he said to whoever was still on the line. His tone was all business, brisk, efficient, heartless. The USB drive plugged into my laptop blinked with a faint red light as files copied over. Carver campaign, marketing budget, client acquisition proposals. Everything I had spent months building. My life's work reduced to data, sold for the price of betrayal. My hands trembled violently as I lifted my phone, switching to video. Through the narrow gap in the door, I captured it all, the glowing laptop, the copying progress bar, the vial, his face illuminated by the screen's pale light. The man I had once trusted looked almost unrecognizable. Cold eyes, a tight jaw, a smile of quiet satisfaction. I edged back a little, the phone shaking in my hand. A new sound joined the scene, the sirens growing louder, swelling into a chorus that filled the night. For a heartbeat, I almost believed it was over. Then Gabriel froze. His head jerked toward the window. "What the hell?" he muttered, pulling the curtain aside. The color drained from his face as the red and blue lights reflected in the glass. "No, no, no." His voice cracked, panic replacing composure. He spun toward the desk, yanking the USB from my laptop and shoving it into his pocket. I could see the calculation in his eyes even from where I crouched, the desperate scramble of a man realizing his plan had just imploded. I turned to crawl back toward the kitchen, needing to get out of sight, to make it look like I'd collapsed again. But fate betrayed me. My foot grazed a shard of the shattered plate, and it splintered beneath my weight with a sharp, unmistakable crunch. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. Gabriel whipped his head toward the noise, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. "Savannah." His voice was quiet, dangerous now. The voice of a predator cornered. My breath caught. My heart raced. The faint echo of sirens roared louder, closer. But I knew, in that suspended, razor-sharp moment, that before the police reached the door, it would just be me and him. And only one of us would walk away. "Savannah." Gabriel's voice sliced through the air, sharp and searching, the sound of a man whose lies had begun to unravel. I could hear the tremor beneath his fury, the panic he was trying so hard to bury. His footsteps thundered closer, heavy and uneven against the tile. I dropped behind the kitchen island, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle the ragged edge of my breathing. My pulse drummed against my ribs like a war cry. "Savannah, where are you?" he shouted again, voice cracking with something that almost sounded like fear. The lights from outside painted the walls in flashes of red and blue, dancing shadows that grew brighter with every second. Tires screeched, car doors slammed, and distant voices barked orders. Gabriel cursed, the sound guttural and raw, then spun on his heel and bolted toward the office. The floorboards creaked under his weight, a sound I'd learned to dread. I didn't wait. I threw myself toward the front door, every muscle screaming to move faster. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the deadbolt, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. It finally clicked, and the door flew open just as Detective Harris stepped onto the porch, his badge catching the strobe of police lights. Relief hit me like a tidal wave. "He's in the office," I gasped, barely able to speak. "Laptop, USB, drug vial, everything's there." Harris didn't hesitate. He signaled to his team, and a swarm of officers stormed past me, their shouts colliding with the chaos inside. I stumbled down the front steps, collapsing onto the damp grass as the cold night air hit my face. For a moment, I could only sit there, shaking uncontrollably, the sound of my heartbeat roaring in my ears. The nightmare wasn't just in my head anymore, it had burst into the open, and I was still standing. The next hours blurred together in fragments of light and noise. Camera flashes. Radios crackling. The low murmur of voices piecing together the wreckage of my life. Inside, the kitchen had transformed into an evidence scene. The broken ceramic was gone, swept into a bin, replaced by labeled bags and latex gloves. The metallic scent of disinfectant filled the air. Detective Harris sat across from me at my own table, his notepad open, expression unreadable. "We've tested the liquid," he said, nodding toward a sealed bag holding the small vial that had nearly destroyed me. "It's a controlled sedative, slow-acting, but dangerous when used repeatedly. Mixed into food or drinks, it causes disorientation, fatigue, confusion. Long-term exposure could have damaged your organs permanently." His words washed over me like acid. I stared at that tiny vial, this inconspicuous weapon that had drained months of my strength, made me doubt my sanity, made me believe I was simply ill. My fingers dug into the edge of the table as if to anchor myself to something real. "We also traced payments," Harris continued. $5,000 transferred monthly from Juan Thomas, VP at Apex Strategies. The final payment, $50,000, confirmed today. It was the price for your campaign data. For your trust. I couldn't speak. My throat burned. My marriage, everything I'd built, had been nothing more than a contract to him. Gabriel had traded my career, my health, my peace, for a handful of zeros. The sound of footsteps drew my gaze to the doorway. Dr. Patel entered quietly, her presence grounding amid the chaos. Her calm face and professional poise were a lifeline I didn't realize I was clinging to. She knelt beside me, checked my pulse, pressed her stethoscope against my chest. "Your heart's racing," she murmured, though her voice trembled slightly. "You're safe now, Savannah. But this won't vanish overnight. Give yourself grace. You've survived something vile." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. "He made me think I was losing my mind," I whispered. "He made me believe I was broken." Dr. Patel's hand tightened gently around mine. "He wanted control. But you took it back tonight." Through the wide front window, I saw them leading Gabriel out in handcuffs. His once confident posture had collapsed into something small, pathetic. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, eyes darting wildly until they locked on mine. For a heartbeat, time froze. He looked at me, not with remorse, not with love, but with the shock of a man realizing the game was over. I didn't flinch. I met his stare until they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, his voice muffled beneath the slam of the door. The red and blue lights painted his features one last time before the car pulled away. The house was quiet again, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmurs of officers finishing their work. The evidence bags lined my counter like grim trophies of betrayal. I sat there, wrapped in a blanket one of the paramedics had given me, as dawn began to bleed through the blinds. Every crack in the walls, every shadow, felt different now, haunted by what had happened but no longer owned by it. For the first time in months, I inhaled without fear. The air tasted clean. The weight in my chest eased, if only slightly. Gabriel's voice still echoed faintly in my head, but it no longer had power. He'd taken so much, but not everything. "Not me." He mouthed, "I'm sorry," but the words were empty, thin and weightless, a coward's last attempt to rewrite the truth. His eyes flickered with the same false sincerity that had fooled me for years, yet now I could see the rot beneath the charm. That apology wasn't for me, it was for himself, a pathetic effort to soften the fall from grace. I watched as they led him away, the cuffs biting into his wrists, and realized he had never loved me, only envied me. He'd despised every milestone I reached, every accolade that lifted me higher while his own ambitions crumbled into dust. His betrayal wasn't born of desperation alone, it was venomous resentment, a slow-growing hatred he'd disguised as affection. That night, the silence in my house felt cavernous, almost holy. The scent of cleaning chemicals lingered from the police sweep, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that tethered me to the present. My office, once the battleground of deceit, was now my sanctuary. I locked the door, slid into my chair, and powered on my laptop. The familiar glow bathed the room in soft light. It was mine again, every keystroke, every file, every idea. The machine that once held evidence of his betrayal now pulsed with the rhythm of my own rebirth. I rebuilt the presentation from the ground up. Slide by slide, I poured in fresh concepts, sharper visuals, stronger data. Each word became a weapon, each design a declaration that he hadn't broken me. I encrypted everything with new layers of protection, passwords that no one could guess, firewalls upon firewalls. Gabriel could rot behind bars and still never touch my work again. It wasn't just about the campaign anymore, it was about reclaiming what he'd tried to steal, my brilliance, my voice, my sense of worth. By dawn, exhaustion tugged at me, but determination burned brighter. The city outside began to stir, sunlight bleeding through the blinds like a quiet promise. I dressed with precision, charcoal suit, white blouse, red lipstick. My reflection stared back, not the fragile woman who'd collapsed on the kitchen floor days ago, but someone reborn in defiance. I drove to Carver Enterprises with a calmness that surprised me, my fingers steady on the wheel. The boardroom shimmered with polished glass and tension. Mr. Coleman stood as I entered, greeting me with a firm nod. "Savannah's perseverance is something extraordinary," he said, pride warming his tone. The room buzzed with murmurs, snippets about the espionage case, whispers of betrayal, speculation about how I'd managed to survive. I straightened my shoulders, ignoring them all. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice resonant and unwavering. "This isn't just a marketing plan. It's a blueprint for transformation, a strategy to redefine Carver's identity in a changing world." The projector flickered to life, illuminating the room with my vision. Every slide flowed seamlessly into the next: market analysis, creative strategy, digital innovation. I spoke with conviction, my words landing like thunderbolts of clarity. Eyes widened. Heads nodded. Even the skeptics leaned in, captivated. When I finished, silence lingered for a heartbeat before the room erupted in applause. Genuine, thunderous applause that rolled through the air like a storm breaking. The CEO leaned forward, a rare smile spreading across his face. "Miss Thompson," he said, voice brimming with admiration, "this is extraordinary. When can we begin?" "Immediately," I replied, the faintest smile touching my lips. "The future won't wait." 3 months later, the Carver campaign had become a juggernaut. Sales spiked 40%. Media outlets called it revolutionary. Competitors scrambled to catch up. My name appeared in trade magazines, interviews, and keynote lineups. Carver's success was being dissected in business schools, and I was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Marketing, the youngest in the company's history. Meanwhile, justice unfolded in the background. Gabriel received 5 years for domestic abuse, fraud, and espionage. His smug confidence evaporated in the courtroom, replaced by the blank stare of a man realizing the empire he'd tried to steal had collapsed instead. Apex Strategies imploded under federal investigation, clients withdrew, investors fled, and Juan Thomas was arrested, his career shredded beyond repair. Watching their downfall didn't bring joy, but it did bring closure. They'd gambled with integrity and lost everything. Dr. Patel remained by my side through the aftermath, a steady force reminding me that healing wasn't linear. She connected me with a therapist who taught me how to breathe again, how to trust my own instincts, how to stop apologizing for my strength. Little by little, I reclaimed the parts of myself Gabriel had tried to erase. Now, when I stand in my new office high above Chicago's skyline, I can see the city glittering like a field of stars beneath the night. The glass walls reflect not a survivor, but a woman who rebuilt from ruin and made something luminous. The pain still lingers in small ways, a flicker of doubt when someone offers kindness, a twinge of fear in quiet moments, but it no longer defines me. I've learned that broken doesn't mean defeated. I step closer to the window, the city lights painting my reflection in gold. Somewhere far below, traffic hums like a heartbeat, alive and constant. I place my hand against the cool glass and whisper to the woman staring back, "You made it." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believe it. Gabriel tried to break me, but instead, he reforged me into something unshakable. The fire he ignited in his betrayal didn't consume me, it tempered me. Every scar, every sleepless night, every whisper of doubt became steel in my spine. Now, when I walk into my office, sunlight streaming across the polished floor, I see not the ghost of who I was but the strength of who I've become. The framed Carver contract hangs proudly on the wall behind my desk, the gold lettering catching the morning light like a quiet victory. It's more than paper, it's proof that my spirit can't be stolen, that my worth doesn't depend on anyone's approval, and that truth always finds its way through deception. Sometimes I still catch my reflection in that glass frame and remember the woman who once second-guessed every choice, who ignored her instincts to keep peace, who mistook manipulation for love. She's gone now. In her place stands a woman who learned to rebuild from ashes, who no longer apologizes for her brilliance or softens her edges to make others comfortable. That framed contract is my reminder that resilience isn't born in comfort, it's forged in chaos, sharpened by betrayal, and polished by survival. In the months that followed Gabriel's arrest, I faced more questions than I ever imagined. Reporters wanted statements. Colleagues whispered in hallways. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration, a few with envy. I learned to carry it all with grace, to let curiosity roll off me like rain. I wasn't just a victim of corporate espionage, I was the woman who turned disaster into triumph. Carver's campaign continued to soar, setting new industry standards. My team grew under my leadership, and for the first time, I felt the quiet thrill of knowing I had built something unshakable, not just for the company, but for myself. Outside of work, I started volunteering with organizations that support women recovering from emotional abuse and financial manipulation. Each story I heard reminded me that survival isn't one moment, it's 1,000 choices to keep going when quitting feels easier. I spoke at conferences, not as a marketing executive, but as a voice for those silenced by fear. My story wasn't about revenge or victory, it was about reclaiming power, one truth at a time. At home, my nights are peaceful now. I light candles, let music fill the air, and sit beneath the framed contract with a glass of tea, watching the city lights shimmer beyond my window. The skyline no longer feels like something towering above me, it feels like something I belong to. Chicago hums with energy, a symphony of resilience that mirrors my own. The sound reminds me that even after the darkest nights, morning always comes. So, thank you for listening, for standing beside me through every twist, every revelation, every moment of fear and redemption. Sharing this with you means more than I can express. If my story resonated, if it made you pause, reflect, or recognize a piece of your own struggle, please hit that like button and subscribe. It keeps me grounded, gives purpose to the pain I've lived through, and fuels my drive to keep telling stories that matter. Stories of survival, of courage, of transformation. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find our way back to ourselves. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to tell the truth.